Okay. So this has importance in part. There's a lot of reasons why it's important, but one of the reasons why it's important is because of the statistics provided by the American Heart Association that says, quote, approximately 10% of infants require help to begin breathing at birth, and 1% need intensive resuscitation. So that means that since 2019, these communities have been forced to reckon with a likely 1% infant mortality rate that they didn't have as severely before 2019, and they may have not had at all. These deaths are invisible as well, since the pregnancy is not recorded, since it did not result in a live birth, and so neither is the death. And you are
So my name is Vicky Headley, and I am a certified midwife, and that's where my New York license is held. And I'm a certified professional midwife, and I have my New Jersey license and Virginia license with a certified professional midwife.
okay, and are you like the president of the New Jersey chapter
No,
of, or?
I'm the treasurer and the legislative chair of the New Jersey Certified Professional Midwives Association.
Okay. Staten Islander News is talking today with Vicki Headley. She is the treasurer and legislative chair of the New Jersey chapter for the Certified Professional Midwife Association in New Jersey. CPMs are licensed as birth professionals, and they've been improving outcomes and positive birth experiences since 2016. And a certified professional midwife is very different than a certified midwife or a licensed certified nurse midwife, both of which are what is necessary in New York. So in New York, a certified professional midwife is not allowed to practice their profession. So, unlike in New Jersey, New York State has put in place a requirement that every midwife must have a master's degree, which is at a very high cost, essentially shutting out many of the people who would have wanted to choose this career path. They're relegated to non-birth related careers or to becoming a doula or to leaving the state, as many of the best midwives already have. In 2010, the law referenced above was passed, and in 2019, a single infant death led to a witch hunt and the arrest and deprofessionalization of every midwife working in upstate New York, who were then working at as CPMs kind of under the radar without a path to licensure. The one of many reasons this is important and why we're here today is that upstate New York is home to at least 7 communities of Amish and Mennonite families. These are the invisible constituents of the state's elected officials. They speak English as a second language, their first language being Dutch. They don't use electricity, they don't use computers or typewriters. They sew their own clothes and farm without heavy machinery. They don't participate in the US Census and they don't buy health insurance. And most importantly, they do not, and most of the time will not, go to a hospital to give birth or to a birthing center if one was accessible to them. They deliver babies at home, on average 7 to 14 per family, and they do so almost always unattended, catching each other's babies with no one experienced or trained in delivering babies or in assisting when things go wrong, present at their births by law.
Oh,
This has importance in part because,
okay, so
sure,
one thing I wanted to say that you said in error in the very beginning is that CPMs in New Jersey are licensed since 2016. We're licensed since 2001. So I don't know
2001.
where
Okay.
2016 came from.
Okay, there was a new law where it was under the midwifery board, I guess, rather than just like the physicians board or maybe some kind of
No,
change. So it was
no,
2001.
we're trying to get a midwifery board in the state.
Okay.
That's the main law that we're working on right now. Oh, you disappeared off of your thing. There you are.
Okay. Okay, cool. So CPMs have been licensed since 2001, and in New York, they're just not licensed. Like if you
Correct.
want to practice midwifery in New York, you
Correct.
have to have a master's degree and do all of that.
Correct.
Okay.
And that happened on January 1st, 2011. You were correct about that.
Okay. These Mennonite and Amish women have their births usually unattended, catching each other's babies, with no one experienced or trained in delivering babies or in assisting when things go wrong present at their births, which is actually part of the requirement of the law, is that no one who's a midwife can be there unless she has a master's degree. So the same or similar may also apply in other religious communities in New York, because there are a lot, but this definitely applies to the Amish and Mennonite communities. Okay, so this has importance in part. There's a lot of reasons why it's important, but one of the reasons why it's important is because of the statistics provided by the American Heart Association that says, quote, approximately 10% of infants require help to begin breathing at birth, and 1% need intensive resuscitation. So that means that since 2019, these communities have been forced to reckon with a likely 1% infant mortality rate that they didn't have as severely before 2019, and they may have not had at all. These deaths are invisible as well, since the pregnancy is not recorded, since it did not result in a live birth, and so neither is the death. Starting in 2010 or in early 2011, with the passage of with the effective date of the new bill that had been passed in 2010, was an exodus of midwives from New York, leaving a void. Many of these communities are now maternal care deserts with no hospital, birth center, or any prenatal care within 30 minutes of their home by car, which some of them also don't have. We're here to talk about some of the possible changes in Albany, along with some of the obstacles and possible solutions to bringing New York on par with our closest neighbor, New Jersey, whose excessively high maternal and infant mortality rates have fallen precipitously since the licensure of CPMs, which was actually in 2001. So, good morning, Vicki and Dalit. It's good to have you with us.
Hi.
Thank you so much.
So I'm curious, again, I'm just going to ask you the question, like, where did you get the data that says infant mortality has fallen precipitously since CPMs have been
That was just based on the statistics between New Jersey before licensure and after. So at first, in somewhere in 2010, the last time it said that the statistics used to be 29% and of maternal mortality, and now they're 15%. Is
In
so
that
Homer.
incorrect? Because that might be wrong too.
so I would be very mindful of making that kind of a statement because that is not backed up by data. There's
Okay.
there is
Sorry, Vicky, is she talking about in home birth or
I
in
don't I don't
all
know. What
total?
are you talking about
Because
infant mortality in the state overall? Because we have very, very, very few home birth midwives.
Mm-hmm.
And of with the home birth midwives, we have a very low mortality rate. I mean, it's not that we've never lost a baby, right? But it's certainly a low rate. But the rates are not reflective of our work in the state. We would be bragging beyond what we know to be true to have that be a statement that I would be willing to put my name on.
Okay. So,
the only
the
thing I would say is if she's talking, sorry to interrupt, but if you're referring to unattended home births versus attended home births, that statistic might be correct. Don't you
I could
agree,
see
Vicky?
that. Yes, for sure. Like if we're talking about that, but the reality is the birth certificate doesn't ask if we have do we have intended home birth on the birth
Yeah,
certificate
yeah,
now? We
because
do.
if, yeah, we do. Yeah,
Okay.
it's the first page, yeah.
So if they're looking at it like that and comparing prior to 2001 and after 2001, then I could say I would buy that, right? But I would be really, really careful about making that statement.
Okay. And that was, if I think I misspoke if I said infant mortality, it was the maternal mortality that I was referring to that Jersey was having a problem with that they said, I have to look and see where that information came from because that was just in my notes.
Right.
Um,
So,
that their statistic before was like 26% of maternal mortality, not infant mortality. And the infant mortality is an estimate because we don't know, and because that's based on the American Heart Association's website says that statistic
right,
that I quoted.
right.
So it's an
So,
assumption. It's an
so in
assumption
terms
that
of,
across the board, 1% of infants who are born will need assistance breathing. And if there's
right,
nobody there because they're
understood.
having unattended home births, then and that excessive, what did it say, intensive resuscitation, which literally, according to their website, as it continued, could involve tracheotomies and all kinds of stuff that an
Right,
EMS would provide.
right.
Whereas if it's in a home birth situation, then by the time the EMS would arrive, then that infant would not be alive.
So in terms of the changes in maternal mortality that you may have found recently, there, so Nurture New Jersey, which is an organization, I guess, that's started by Tammy Murphy during her husband's administration. One of the goals of that was to reduce the maternal mortality rate. They brag, if you will, that they have dramatically through all of their things, through all of
Yeah, I
their
think that's actually where it came from,
so
was through
29.
political bragging.
Right. So 29th is actually, they even changed that in the most recent one. They said something like 26th. I'm like, where are you getting these numbers? We were 47th in the country in 2020. There is no way we have gone from 47th to 28th or 29th since 2020. What they're doing is they're looking at different numbers. Around the country has gotten worse, which makes the balance go bigger. This is a performative statement. And the the reality is, again, as CPMs, we have absolutely not changed the maternal mortality rate. We don't have any maternal deaths in our stats. But again, we're a very small group. I'm on the Maternal Mortality Review Committee for the state of New Jersey, um, as a committee member representing the CM and the CPM, which was by law enacted in 2018 that they had to develop a new maternal mortality committee. That law passed, I think, in 2019. They established that committee in 2020, and I got very honored to be invited to that committee and to be appointed by the governor to represent the CM and the CPM on that committee. And I'm telling you that I'm really not allowed to talk about any of those things, but the reality is that the state of New Jersey has not improved that much. And again, I think we have to just be really careful about what it is that we're saying when it comes to making broad statements about the possibility of making those changes. Now,
Right.
that's not to say that I don't believe we can. I do, but I'm not going to say we are.
Okay, that makes sense. So what I want to do now is, since the brief introduction of kind of what we're going to talk about today, if I could kind of get like your stories. So whichever one of you guys would like to start first, and particularly if you were part of New York and you ended up moving to New Jersey, or if you're still in New York, or like the whole New York, New Jersey stuff, definitely interesting because a lot of our readers are from New Jersey, and like Staten Island is kind of like in the elbow of New
Yeah.
Jersey anyway. But this would be very helpful for our readers to kind of learn about who you guys are also.
So why don't you start, Dalit?
Okay. I was raised in Staten Island. It was my community, my town. My family was there, my friends were there. And when I started my path to midwifery school, which, I don't have to tell you exactly, but, definitely a calling and something I knew I wanted to do. Um, I it was before 2010. So I picked a school to become a certified professional midwife, and because I believed in the education and the training for that. And I wanted to practice in home birth and out of hospital birth, community birth. And I didn't want to go through a hospital training only to have to relearn how to practice outside of the hospital. So I picked this school, and I remember, getting in, I think sometime in January, starting school after the summer, or maybe the June was the orientation. And then I was actually at Vicky's house when I learned that they had changed the law. And so I wasn't going to change my path because I believed in the school. I feel like it was the best education. I am so blessed to have gone there and worked with my preceptor. But so I lived in Staten Island and I precepted with a midwife in New Jersey. So I did leave my area. And yes, the what you were talking about earlier about the movie and the maternity care deserts are definitely in like upstate New York, as we call it. But Staten Island was its own little maternity desert
Hmm.
Okay.
because that means that a woman had to do all her prenatal care in Brooklyn or Manhattan, and then maybe one of those midwives would come and do her home birth in Staten Island. But for a long time, the midwives in New York, Staten Island was a trip, a toll, and will I make it in time, and all that kind of thing. And then backing up even years, my mother had home births in Staten Island. And she started off with a midwife in the city and she schlepped to the city for all her prenatal visits. And then this woman, made it to her birth. But by her last child, she did want a midwife who was trained in the CPM route. And she drove all the way up to northern Jersey to see somebody there. And thank God that woman made it for her fourth kid, in New York. But so this is something like a little bit in my personal history. We've been suffering with midwives on Staten Island for a while. So I did my schooling and I left and I drove, far to get this kind of training and I worked in New Jersey and then eventually just decided to move. I wasn't willing to practice illegally. Obviously I don't recommend recommend it, but sometimes it happens because of the situation. I do feel a little bit lucky that New Jersey was right over the bridge. It didn't feel like I was moving so far. I stayed, relatively close to the Staten Island side. But I know a lot of people, especially in Manhattan, who have their family in Manhattan, their family in the Bronx, they're not just going to Jersey. And the CPM training should be accessible to people. It's a more accessible training. It doesn't require a master's. Doesn't mean it's a lesser than. It's a training, like I said, for out of hospital birth, which is something I really knew I wanted to do. So I am one of the ones who had to leave, not by choice. I've built a life in New Jersey and we're doing okay, but I don't know that I would have left. And yeah, and that's sort of that story. So I was on the NYCPM committee for a while. Actually, to tell you the truth, I had just given birth to my second child when we started the WhatsApp group for the New York committee, the NYCPM, to try and change the law in New York. She's almost 8 and it still hasn't been changed. And it just ridiculous because exactly as you mentioned, right? We have some people that do not have care accessible to them. And like you said, and also in the movie, I'm sure you saw post COVID, they closed the closest hospitals even. So even if you wanted to say that these women could give birth in the hospital if they wanted to, which we know is not really accessible, they don't really even have anything, within the hour and definitely even further.
And I would love to know what the statistics are for giving birth in their cars on the way to
Exactly.
Or
somewhere.
Exactly.
if we're talking about up there, the buggies, giving birth in the
The
buggies.
buggy. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Okay. So go ahead, Vicky, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about your background
So
and stuff.
yeah, so I became a CPM first. I lived in northern New Jersey on the border of New York and New Jersey, and I was licensed in New Jersey in 2008. To give you an idea of how few of us there are, I was the seventh person in that 6, 7 years from 2001 to 2008 to be licensed as a CPM in New Jersey. So our numbers are very small. Um, I decided because I lived on the border that I wanted to have a CM license as well. I wanted to work in New York. I wanted to have prescriptive privileges. I had wanted to be able to do VBACs, which I couldn't do in New York, in New Jersey rather, but could do in New York at home under my CM license. And so there were a lot of good reasons to do it. I happened to be in the last cohort of the only way, because I was a CPM. So what I did, what I had to do was challenge the state of New York because in order to get a CM license as a CPM, you had to challenge the state of New York, the Department of Education, in order to be able to take the AMCB test. So, for a variety of reasons, one of them is that they didn't really want us to do that anymore, in my opinion. They sort of cut down that pathway because the ACNM determined and AMCB determined that you needed the master's. So I got licensed October 17th, which was Yom Kippur, actually, Erev Yom Kippur. On October 17th of 2010, I passed my CM exam. Now, by then, we already knew that 2011 was going to be the end. The reason Dalit was at my house is because I had study groups and there were 7 people. Were you in that group, Dalit?
I wasn't part of your study group, but I joined a few times. Yeah.
So there were 7 people who were unable to move forward. There were 7 students, 7 CPM students that couldn't move forward. Ultimately, one of them is now licensed, another one of them is now licensed, but it took her 12 years. Like she was going to be licensed, in a couple of years, but it took her another 12 years to actually get through CM school in New York by the time she did it. And then somebody else took 2 or 3 years. It was really terrible. And so back in whatever year that was that 2017 or 18, Dalit, when we started with the
What are
NJC,
you referring to?
NYCPM?
It was 16, exactly. Yeah.
16. So in 2016, I also started with that effort.
I'm sorry, 18.
18. I
18.
thought it was 18. So we
Yes.
started with the effort in 2018. At the time, I was the president of the Midwives Alliance of North America. So I was one of the sort of like an advisor, and I had done some legislative work around the country because of being on the Midwives Alliance of North America board, and so was able to help with some of that. But the bill is completely different now. Like I guess I stopped maybe in 2020 or something, but it's it's remarkable. It's remarkable how difficult it is. We're trying in New Jersey to change the laws in New Jersey, and we're having a terrible, terrible time. We've been at it only 3 years in comparison to New York, but it was really more than 3 years because there was another bill that was so bad before ours that nobody even looked at it. And then we ultimately, Dalit, myself, and Dina actually wrote a bill. Um, Actually, we rewrote a bill that had been entered and it has been rewritten multiple times and it did not pass this time. In the meantime, the Murphy administration is bragging that they passed 78 maternal child health bills, but without the Midwifery Licensing Act, we are licensed, but this is like a modernization act, but it's called the Midwifery Licensing Act. Without that bill, a vast majority of the bills that they passed over the past couple of years, they're not going to be able to implement them because they're not going to have the midwifery workforce to do it. And so we're still working really hard to try to do that in New Jersey. And I'm surprised that have you tried to talk to the NYCPM, the current NYCPM folks, to see where they're at with that bill?
No, I haven't. This is basically, I found out about this back in June that it had even happened like 7 years ago in the first place. So I was
Got
like,
it.
I don't know
Got
where
it.
I was. And then after that, I reached out to you guys because I was able to find your website. I wasn't able to find a website for the New York, but there must be one there. Maybe it's just not on Google or something. I don't know. But
It
it's
might even not be. After this, we'll try and put you in touch with some names. But yeah,
yeah, because I mean the purpose of this meeting also is to kind of gather some information, and then we want to set up a meeting with some of the Staten Island politicians, because we're familiar with them and we know them,
yeah,
and kind of just give them some information about this whole field that they may not be aware of, because it's definitely more of like a kind of like a secondary thing. Most people don't know about midwives. Most people just assume it's allowed. They just assume you can have whatever you want. They just assume we're in New York. We're the most freest state in the country.
Yeah,
right,
hardly.
You
right.
could, of course, you could have exactly the kind of birth that you want. Of course, there are enough birth weight. No, okay, no. Oops.
So,
Yeah.
did you tell me that Kathy Hochul is opposed to this bill? Did you tell me that?
Yes, in a sense of that she is primarily lobbied by ACOG District 2
Mm-hmm.
and the New York Association of Hospitals, HH something something.
Mm-hmm.
They lobby her very heavily. And basically, by lobbying, it means that they make all of her staff members see their ads 50,000 times a day. And maybe
Mhm.
her most vocal constituent group, like in some county or something, where if they say, call Governor Hochul, they'll all pick up the phone and call her. But it may not be actually representative of what everyone wants. And they still insist those two organizations, like ACOG is starting to come around because, I mean, we're
Yeah,
at 39 states at this point, and
yeah.
the data is just mounting and
So I
getting bigger
think
every day.
I think it's really interesting that ACOG has been deemed and was a part of US MIRA back in the day. And as of 2016, I think it was when those US MIRA agreements were signed, either 2015 or 2016. And they are not supposed to be opposing bills that have that have validity, whether it's a Meek school or PEP plus Bridge. They agreed, they signed papers that was PEP plus Bridge, and I think it was 2015. Look up US MIRA online. You should be able to find it. And they have, model legislation and all kinds of stuff in there. And I was on those committees because I was at MANA at the time. And the fact that they could be opposing these bills is just disgusting because National ACOG said don't oppose the bills
Mhm, mhm.
way back when.
And I also think interesting thing, especially to bring up to politicians, is during COVID, there was a an exemption that said that any provider from out of the state, so CPMs were able to practice in New York,
Hmm.
and there was only, benefits and more people having the birth that they want, especially in a really precarious time. And we took the load a little bit off of the hospital in a way that they didn't want. And then, it was all okay then. And then all of a sudden, it's not okay. When we really thought that the bill for New York would have easily followed that exemption.
They
Right,
should have. They should have.
Yeah.
right, right.
We also got an exemption in the time in New Jersey where CPMs were allowed to work in birth centers where we weren't before. And that exemption has held in spite of the rest of the stuff because it was done as an exemption as opposed to an executive order. We got lucky. We went through the Department of Health to be able to work in birth centers. And
Mhm.
we're still
Yeah, because
doing
I
that.
know that during the first few months of COVID, doulas were considered one of the family. It was the weirdest thing. Like, so a person would have to choose my doula or my husband, my doula or my mom.
There were doulas
And
Right.
standing outside hospital rooms in the cold talking to people because, it's March and it's freaking freezing. And they're standing outside the windows or we're on the phone with people
yeah.
really bad.
Mm.
And we weren't
But
even
DONA
allowed
really
as,
actually came through for them very well. Like in terms of like as a professional organization, it took
yeah.
them 4 months, I think. It took them from March to August.
Hmm.
So they finally, got the governor to change that, which made no sense at all. But
Yeah.
Yeah, but interestingly enough, that seems to happen. I don't know why, besides for the fact that doulas and midwives are notoriously confused in mainstream, right, organization. But also a lot of New Jersey does this, and you see New York as well. They're much faster to let's get Medicaid to cover doulas. Let's get doulas to be required in hospitals. Let's have hospital doula programs, which Maimonides in Brooklyn had, and I believe another hospital in New York has it as well. And it's all band-aids. I'm not saying anything bad about doulas. I absolutely love them, think they're amazing, but they're trying to put a band-aid on their system by bringing in a doula because their system is failing the people that want to give birth. And
right.
they spend, even in New Jersey, spend so much money on a bill to help doulas get covered by Medicaid, so much money to educate people, right? Vicky, what's that bill that was just passed? How much was
Educate
that?
$100,000 given to NJ Mia to educate people about midwives and doulas. And first of all, midwives and doulas are two completely different things. They shouldn't have conflated it in the bill. And
Yeah,
secondarily, in order to do that, you need to have the midwives that people can go to. Like we have the state of New Jersey is the most densely populated state in the country. We have under 420 licensed midwives in the state. And in terms of CPMs, you don't even want to know how few there are actually working.
yeah.
Mhm,
And so I think that they just like keep missing the boat. on how to help the people giving birth in New York and New Jersey.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I wanted to kind of talk about why the CPM credentials, the Certified Professional Midwife, is important for birthing mothers and their babies. How does it equate to the CNM and CM in terms of experience, education, apprenticeship, and birth experience? How long it takes and how much it costs to obtain this credential, and how addition of the CPM credential gives parents more choices and better prenatal care and can possibly resolve the maternal care deserts, of which there are many in New York and New Jersey.
Go for it.
Okay, loaded question. I'm going to say Vicky's going to help me with numbers, but I would say the gist is like this. The certified professional midwife, again, is trained for community birth, so birth and birth centers. So, especially when you're talking about the maternity care desert, that's where these people are giving birth. A lot of birth centers started to be set up because there was a lack of hospitals and people's houses were too far from hospitals. So, the birth center was a good median point. In order to practice safely in the home or in a birth
Uh-oh.
center, you have to be trained to do that. Taking a training where you are in a room with a nurse and a pediatrician and a OB and a second nurse and a NICU nurse and a baby nurse versus a mom nurse. Then you go into a home birth setting and there's, a midwife and her assist, that doesn't transfer as well. So I really do believe that you want to be trained for the job that you want, not have to be like relearning something on the job when we're talking about people's lives. But really, what we practice is preventative care. And again, we do low risk birth in homes. So we're really good at weeding out who's appropriate for community birth, who's not appropriate for community birth. And that's how we keep home birth safe. So being trained in normal, first of all, helps us take care of people and treating them like normal, which doesn't mean that we ignore issues, doesn't mean that we miss issues. It just, when you're the expert in normal, it's very easy to see what's abnormal. So I think that that kind of training really helps us keep home birth safe. We're not pushing lines, we're not pushing limits. We know when it's appropriate and when
I'm
it
going to
isn't.
interrupt Ali because it says that we have less than a minute here, Heather.
Okay, so let me see. So that's about the training. I think it's really important that we're trained in normal, we're trained in low risk, we're trained in community settings. Um, I'm gonna maybe ask you to repeat like some part of the question, but I'll see what I remember and then go from there. Vicky's going to help me with numbers, but basically we have mostly set up with an entrance into the CPM training. It needs at least a high school diploma. It doesn't mean that many people don't go in with higher education. It just means that it's more accessible to people. So if you have a high school diploma, you can get into either a CPM hybrid program, which is half online, half in person, or we have a few online programs, and they usually take 3 years to complete, but I believe you could have 5 to 7 to finish all your numbers if needed. It's based on the apprenticeship model. So there's the training, skills, textbooks, testing, and then there's an apprenticeship that's always linked to it. Some students end up sticking with one preceptor their whole journey. Other students go between preceptors depending on the program. We always recommend, precepting under a bunch of different people so that you get to see different experience. A lot of CPM students will go to high volume locations so they can get more experience there because maybe in their area where they live, it's not as much. But again, I'm mixing your questions, but back to your accessibility. So having the high school diploma and also not having to leave home, unless of course you live in New York. But being able to, my school, what happened to have been, I went to Maine for 2 weeks. I got to be with my cohort. I got to do skills testing. I did classwork. We did, more textbook testing, and then 2 months apprenticing with a midwife in my area as I did in New Jersey. And I did that back and forth for 2 years. And then the third year, there was less going back to school in Maine. I was able to go to a more high volume practice and practice there. So I think that the accessibility of the education is there, and that doesn't reduce the oh, I'm forgetting the word, but like the education. It doesn't mean it's less than for education. We
If
follow
anything, it's more.
And that's exactly what I want you to help me with because we follow NARM rules. That's the National North American Association of Registered Midwives. And in order to become a CPM, you have to pass that exam. They have a list of how many births, how many prenatal visits, how many um, newborn exams, etc. And I believe that we have required more births than the CNM or the CM. Can you help me with that, Vicky? Do you?
So it's a small extra requirement, but it is. But there are, when a person is becoming a CPM, they are attached to one or more preceptors over the course of this 3 to 5 year period. As a result, you're learning from a variety of people. You're not walking into a hospital and saying, I need 20 births, and I'm going to get those 20 births in a very short amount of time because you're in a hospital and you can just start, in quotes, catching babies. And continuity of care is a critical component of the CPM education. So you're meeting the person at their first prenatal visit. You're working with them throughout the entire course of care. You're at their birth. You're doing their newborn exam. You're meeting with the family afterward and taking care of them afterward under the preceptor, with the preceptor right there the entire time. And so it has a very, very, I have a personal story where I'd been a midwife for a long time already, and I had a transfer to a hospital. And it just so happened that I transferred to a hospital with a midwife that I knew, right? I love this midwife. And she was a midwife way after me, right? She had only been licensed for like a year at that time, but she was a CNM. My client tore. That midwife pulled me out in the hall and she was crying because she had not ever been given the opportunity to suture during her in quotes preceptorship because they just did it for her and signed off her paperwork and and that was it. So I taught her how to suture like in a hospital setting where I'm not even allowed to do it. I'm not telling you what hospital it was or the name of the midwife because the reality is I'm not allowed to do that in their hospital. But they didn't ever teach her properly how to take care of a person. We are taking care of them from the beginning of their care all the way through. And what Dalit said before about not being able to, she didn't say it this way, but I say it this way. We can't just push a button and say, we need our placenta taken out. We can't just push a button and say, where's the whole resuscitative team? Our experience and our training gives us the ability to do that. And it's remarkable to me that there could be an ACOG bumper sticker that says home birth is for pizzas when in
Home delivery.
home
Home
delivery,
delivery
sorry,
is for,
right?
yeah.
Home delivery is for pizzas, and in the meantime, we're unsafe.
They're the factory. They're the factory. And you're much more likely as a student to be shuffled through. I mean, your 20 births could have been totally normal and no complications. But with a preceptor, you're like, oh my God, I've never experienced a blah, blah, blah complication. And she's going to stick with you till you sort of do, you know? And I also like with right just that shuffling through of students. And Vicky, you said something I really wanted to talk about. Oh yes, because one of your questions was why do the birthing people of New York want this, right? We are the we treat the pregnant person and the baby as a unit all the way through to 6 weeks. And we have such a better system to support the person who just gave birth in a mainstream hospital system, even with a great CNM, that's the system that they're getting away from. And the system says you give birth, then you get a newborn baby, then you have to go home 24 to 48 hours later. Then you have to run to the pediatrician 2 days later, even though you have a fourth degree tear or had a C-section. And then you got to run back for your 6 week visit. But in that big chunk of time, nobody's taking care of the birther. Nobody. And we don't forget that it's not an incubator and it's a person that needs care throughout that whole time. And we do continue newborn care. So you don't have to run out to a pediatrician. We may, of course, if there's an issue, we'll refer, but we make sure that um, the whole family unit is being taken care of, you know? And this is what people need.
I
This is
also
what they're missing.
I also think not enough can be said for what the parameters of normal look like at home. Our parameters of normal are widened by our experience, of course, right? So we're able to navigate through some really wide parameters of normal. But the reality is, we see abnormal and we can recognize it really fast. You mentioned that before, Dalit, but I'm mentioning it again because what happens in factory birth or industrialized birth is they think everything is normal. And the reality is, not everything is normal. Women are not listened to, they're not even seen. They can bleed to death in a hospital bed.
Mhm.
Like, yes, We leave after 3 to 4 hours, right? We're going home. But I've seen women in hospitals, it's a horrible thing and terrible, die the next morning because she bled out in her bed, because she didn't get the kind of care overnight that she needed, because they were too busy taking care of everybody else. Like that would never happen. They have access to us 24/7, no matter what. Obviously, if somebody was bleeding, we walk out the door and we say, this is what you should experience. We leave paperwork, they have our phone numbers, they know they can contact us,
I'm
and they
interrupting
do.
because phone number is so important. And you know how many of the stories started with I had a really bad headache and I just didn't know who to call, or my answering service didn't answer. I didn't know if it was an emergency. It was too hard to tell. And then you know how many texts and phone calls we get that we probably didn't need to get, but we'll take 100 of those so we don't miss the one that we need.
Exactly.
It's a you have someone to reach. Even in a practice with two or three midwives, you have someone to reach.
And
And how many
somehow,
people don't have that?
somehow they call us unsafe. Like this, I mean, I've been at this for 30 years. I haven't been a midwife for 30 years, but I've been going to births for 30 years. It was March 26th, 1996.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And it was so obvious, so fast that I wanted to be a midwife and a home birth midwife at that. Because within a couple of years, I'm like, this is insanity. The level of disrespect that people were getting and the level of separation of mother and baby that is still happening, it's it's just painful.
Mhm. And also I wanted to mention about the home delivery being for pizzas, and that's a campaign of the ACOG because they admitted just recently, they used to have, there was on their website, it said how dangerous home birth was
Mhm.
and it would led to infant mortality and then now there's a big thing in red because apparently a lot of people who read that were like, no, that's not true. And then they were like, what did you base this on? And it
Based it on
came
a
out that
study
they
made
based it on
by,
studies that mixed them together. Unattended plus attended. Yes,
right,
of course, you're going to get a higher rate because you've got the unattendeds in there throwing off the numbers.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but also preterm and term, they
Right.
mix.
absolutely,
Yep.
absolutely.
That's a
All
huge,
of it.
we don't even do anything before 37 weeks. Like this is it's such skewed statistics, and for such a big organization to put that out without appropriate screening of the study is just
And it turned out to
appalling.
be based on two studies, and then another one came out in 2024 that threw it all on its head. It was like they had an infant mortality rate of like point zero something. I don't remember what it was. And it was just like you can't be right. And enough people said you can't be right that they put it in red now on that page. We're probably not right. Give us some time. We're a big organization, got a lot of paperwork to file right now.